Before you give birth, the first step of a birthing process is conception. There must be something that is conceived if anything is ever to be given birth to it. There's got to be a conception. How many know you can't conceive alone? Come on, somebody. Only one has, and only one will. We're going to talk about it in a minute, but you aren't that one. You're going to need to connect in order to conceive. And it's who and what you connect with that will determine what kind of seed you will give birth to. Y'all don't want to hear this. I'm sure you're not going to like it. Luke chapter 1, verse 38. It's the Christmas story, if you will. The Bible said, and Mary said, behold, Mary said, behold, the handmaiden of the Lord, be it unto me according to thy word. And the angel departed from her. He told her nothing was impossible with God in verse 37. She understood that her cousin Elizabeth was already in her old age pregnant. She had conceived, and it was a miracle that she was that old, but she was able to conceive. Not realizing that she was going to go from one spectrum of the scale to another, where there would be one older lady that would have a conception, but there would be one younger lady that would have a conception. I mean, when God does things, God never uses logic as a part of our miracle. Have you ever found out that God doesn't care about man's logic? Are y'all listening to me? God could care less about man's human understanding and man's human wisdom. God does not decide things based upon what we as humans have figured out in our limited ability to understand. God never consults logic as a part of our miracle. Logic is where you reason, where something is reasonable. When something makes sense, we call it logical. But God doesn't consult logic in giving us a miracle. God doesn't care if it's predictable. God doesn't care if it makes sense. God doesn't care if it's within reason, and God doesn't care if it's humanly reasonable, because God is not a man. He is a spirit who cares about doing what is best for us. See, logic, and one way to understand logic is to understand not just what it is, but what its opposite is. Logic is reason. Logic is reasonable. Logic is predictable. But what's the opposite of logic? Faith. So you're either going to be a logical person or you're going to be a faith-filled person. Now, let me ask you something. How many of you think too much when it comes to things in life? Let me see your hands. You think too much. You overthink everything. I mean, when something goes wrong, when your plans get diverted, when you have a thought or an image or an idea in your mind and it doesn't happen the way that you want it to happen, how many of you turn into an absolute wreck? Let me see your hands. Why? Because you're logical. You're reasonable. You are doing things within reason. Okay? And when anything diverts you off of that plan or out of that course, what happens is we get nervous, we get afraid, we get upset, we get anxious, we get agitated because things are not working out the way we had them planned in our minds. Oh, are you glad you came this morning? And it's a lot easier for us, we think, to live by logic than to live by faith. If it's reasonable, we think it's God. But it's just the opposite. Faith and God doesn't consult logic concerning our lives. So a lot of the things God asks us to do, they're not reasonable. They're not within reason. They're not within boundaries. They're not within acceptable, our acceptable mindset. We can't figure it out, so there's got to be something else or something more that is happening and going on, because we live by logic instead of living by faith. Logic will always produce facts, but faith will always produce miracles. So logic, when you reason something, will produce facts that can sometimes cause you to be afraid, cause you to be discouraged. Because your reason or your reasonableness comes from your mind and not your spirit. Faith doesn't come from your head. Faith comes from within your spirit, not from within your mind. And so, here's Mary, a young girl. It didn't make sense. Gets impregnated. My God. Doesn't make sense. A teenager, unwed, unmarried. But one that was yielded to God at an early age. You don't have to wait till you get older or have everything figured out before you start serving God with all your heart. Somebody ought to clap. You don't wait until everything makes sense to give God everything in your life. Because if you do, you wait too long. You miss out on opportunities you could have had if you would have yielded your life sooner to Him. The conception of your miracle begins with the confession of your mouth. So the first stage of birthing is confession. Conception of a miracle begins with the confession of your mouth. So the moment, listen to me, the moment you embrace the Word, because it takes two things to be united in order for something to be conceived. So how many of you know, you're not going to like this, but your prayer alone won't bring a conception in your life. That's why some people, they pray a lot, but they don't see a lot, because all they're doing is using one thing, and they're not combining it with something that can give them a conception. I just don't think my way to be conceived. I can't even speak my way. I've got to combine. So when I'm praying, my prayer has got to be combined with something. Well, what do you combine it with? You combine your prayer with a little faith. In other words, you don't just tell God what you want. You just don't tell God what you're going to do. You put a little action behind the words that come out of your mouth. Now, not only does the process start at conception, but there's growth in the womb. The second part of the birthing process is growth in the womb. There's got to be progress in the process. Part of the process is for you to grow, not for your growth to be stifled. Is anybody listening? But what happens when we're in the process is often we allow the things that we go through to stunt our growth instead of causing the growth to get greater. If there's not growth in the womb of a woman, that baby, there's something wrong with that baby. So no matter how many pains, no matter how many times it pushes and kicks, no matter what they go through, you want that baby to grow. And it's often the painful times that reveal that not only is there life in your belly, but there's growth in your belly. Y'all didn't hear it. See, you don't want there just to be life. You want there to be growth. Because in the middle of what you're going through, when you're walking through the process of life, when you're going through the troubles and trials that you will face in this world, you have to understand that it's God's will for you to grow in the process. Your job in cooperating with God revolves around allowing the things you go through to cause you to become better and stronger, not weaker and depressed. That's why we ought to get to the point where we start thanking people who put us in situations that force growth in our lives. See, I don't always need God when I'm on the mountain because I'm high enough. But when I get low, then we have a tendency to reach out to Him more. But we ought to learn how to depend on God in good times and bad, on the mountain or in the valley. And the Bible said that in Luke 1, verses 41, said it came to pass when Elizabeth, her cousin, heard the salutation of Mary. The babe leaped in her womb. What did Mary do? Mary went to be with her cousin. There's a lot that is unwritten in Luke 1 that's recorded in other Gospels, but we know that when Mary began to share what God had done in her life by this immaculate conception, that everybody didn't like it. Everybody didn't understand it. There was people that ridiculed her. There were people that were wondering what was going on. There were people that separated from her, and she was going through a tough time in her life when a promise was conceived. Wouldn't you think that if God deposited something in you that everything would be perfect from that time forward? Wouldn't that be wonderful? Wouldn't that be a reasonable conclusion that if God made a deposit, everything would be smooth from that point forward? That's why you don't lose logic. Wouldn't it be logical? Hey, she's impregnated by the Holy Spirit. She's about to conceive a son. Oh, this is wonderful. Not everybody will embrace what God is doing inside of you. She got so discouraged. She went to go be with her pregnant cousin, who was older, and although it was a different set of circumstances, became pregnant under a miracle as well. Logic didn't get her impregnated. A miracle got her impregnated. And Mary decided in the midst of her trouble and trials, she was going to go and listen. Say listen to the right people. You know what'll mess you up more than anything? Listening to the wrong people. We got to quit hanging out with people who want to kill our seed. The Lord, He's really been dealing with me about three kinds of people. He's been dealing with me concerning seed eaters, dream thieves, and vision robbers. Seed eaters. When the seed of God is planted, there are people who will come, demons that will arise, situations that will occur that will attempt to eat the seed that's been planted. For instance, you're here today. There's good seed being planted in you. But I wonder how long it's going to take before some seed eater will come to take what's been sowed in your heart today. A lot of times it don't take us getting past the foyer because we see somebody we don't like out in the hallway. Or somebody doesn't say hi to us on our way out the door or say bye to us, we get offended and we get mad. We allow so many things to block our blessing and to eat our seed and to steal the potential of a miracle coming to pass. You have seed eaters, and then you have dream thieves. People who want to steal your dream. The Bible said in the last days they're going to be young men who see visions and older men that are going to dream dreams. How many times does the enemy want to come and steal our dreams and say, well, that dream had a time frame attached to it. There was an expiration date that was placed. Can I tell you, there was no expiration date placed on your dream other than what you put on it? You hang out with the wise, you'll be wise. You hang out with a fool, you're going to be a fool. You got to understand that if you want growth to take place in the middle of that birthing process, you're going to have to hang out with the right people. You're going to have to listen to the right voices, because if you don't, it will cause the growth of that miracle to be stunted. Let me give you the third. It's labor. Labor. Part of birthing is you got to go through labor. Now, some women, when they have a baby, go through more labor than others. We don't really understand why. I think sometimes people have all these little ideas, but there's no really pinpoint reason as to why some go through more labor than another. I remember my wife, when we had our first child, she went through a great amount of labor. I mean, suffered, where when they gave her an epidural, I said, give me one too. And I remember one of the first things we heard after we had that baby was a woman who said, she said, I only had just a few minutes of labor. It was real quick. I was in 1 minute, and then I had the baby the next. And me and my wife looked at one another, and we thought, which one of us is going to hit her first? Can I get a witness? I didn't want to hear about how easy your labor was. We just went through hour after hour, all night long. Doesn't happen when it's supposed to. This thing should have happened at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and here it is mid-morning, and I've been awake all night. This woman's bragging about how easy it was and how convenient it was, and I'm thinking, you know what, you better just be quiet. Because I'm not worried about me as much as I'm worried about my wife slapping you in the next week. There's labor. There will never be a birth without some type or form of labor. In Luke 1, verse 56, the Bible said that Mary abode with Elizabeth, her cousin, for about 3 months and then returned back to her house. Now we know that Mary got her song back by hanging out with the right people. She had lost her joy. She had lost her peace. She had maybe even gotten upset that she had received a promise, because it wasn't all it was cracked out to be. You know, be careful about wanting to be or have what other people have, because if you get it, it may not be everything you thought it was. Have you ever looked at somebody and you thought to yourself, my God, they've got a life like no other. They are just awesome in every way. Well, trust me, everybody's got issues and every family's got situations they got to deal with. Right? Never look at a person and think everything is great, because no matter who they are, there's always some trouble somebody's going through. The third step of giving birth is that labor process. We don't like the labor because it's work, it's hard, it's rough, it's tough. But it's in that point there, man, that can really determine the life or the death of that baby. You got to do the right things, not just at the beginning. You got to do the right things at the end. Joseph was forced to make a long trip to pay his taxes, and the Bible said that Mary went with him, knowing that she was due any time. I'm about to give birth. You've got to go to Bethlehem. You've got to pay your taxes. I'm not going to stay here and wait for you. Now I'm going to go with you. She learned you got to be around the right people. You got to listen to the right voices. Even when you're about to give birth to something, I'm not going to destroy what God has conceived inside of me. Thank God for getting a second chance, learning your lesson, and having the opportunity to make sure you don't make the same mistake twice. Right? And when they got there, they couldn't even find a place to stay. Don't you just wish when God told you to do something, everything worked out, every I was dotted, every T was crossed, everything was put together, you had an answer for everything. When you went out of town, when you're about to give birth, that you would have even a place to stay. He didn't even call and get a hotel at the Best Western. And now they're out of rooms. Just because you're pregnant and about to give birth don't mean everything's going to fall into place, work out, and it doesn't mean you're not going to have any troubles you got to deal with in your life.